I want to explore in greater depth the requirement that the felony must be inherently dangerous for it to trigger the felony murder rule. If the requirement's not present, it's going to be highly unlikely that the potential felon will be deterred by this looming murder charge because he won't think that anybody's going to die. He wouldn't anticipate an injury or death that might arise solely from the fact that he plans to commit this felony. You can see the policy play out in the difference between larceny and robbery. Sure, a death might occur during a larceny. Victim watches from a window as defendant takes his car. Victim's so upset he has a heart attack on the spot and dies. But it wouldn't be fair to invoke the felony murder rule just because victim died during the felony of larceny. The felony's got to be of such character that it's inherently dangerous. When one thinks of a larceny, this doesn't feel like a felony that has a substantial risk inherent in it that someone could die. It's not enough that someone did die. Indeed, that's the underlying theme of felony murder rule. It has to be a felony so dangerous to warrant the artificial mens rea application of the felony murder rule. So, let's suppose someone dies during a felony, and that felony is not listed in the state's Murder 1 statute. How do we go about deciding whether that felony is worthy of triggering the felony murder rule? After all, states have codified many crimes as felonies. Not all are going to be called inherently dangerous. And just because something is a felony doesn't make it inherently dangerous. Enter our next case, which helps instruct us on whether a felony is considered inherently dangerous and how to analyze it. This is Breaking Bad, but for real. Unlike the show, methamphetamine use is not glorified in real world. This is real life, heartbreaking, tragic, and destructive. And like Stamp, this case takes place in California, but in a part of California that has been wrecked by meth use and distribution. Unlike some other illegal drugs, meth devastates a person and the community. This part of California, where the appellate case takes place, has been besieged by the meth epidemic. Those affected by meth live below the poverty level. Children of meth users are neglected, often malnourished. Maybe they don't go to school, maybe they do. And there's always the concern, specifically with meth, as happened here, that meth labs, and I use the term labs loosely, are extremely unsafe with the potential that they might blow up. You can be assured that this appellate court was thinking about all of that when it considered this case. And here was the worst nightmare. While defendant was manufacturing meth in her trailer, we have 3 little children who died when the trailer blew up. Please look at the beginning of the case where the court describes what the jury found. I want you to delve in there to look at it. We see that a jury found defendant guilty of 3 counts of murder. Why 3 counts? Well, because 3 children died. Now look closely at the theories the jury relied on for the conviction of murder. The court said that the jury expressly based each of the murder verdicts on both implied malice and second-degree felony murder. Let's parse out what this statement means. It means that the jury found defendant guilty of murder 2 using 2 very different ways to prove malice. First, through implied malice, which is just another way of saying depraved heart murder. And second, through a different theory called the felony murder rule. 2 very different theories to arrive at the same place, conviction for murder 2. We had learned that malice had 4 ways: intent to kill, intent to commit serious bodily harm, depraved heart murder, or an intent to commit a felony not listed in the Murder 1 statute. 2 of those theories are here. Before we launch into the discussion of felony murder, let's focus on the theory of depraved heart murder, or what the court called implied malice. Indeed, it's fair to say that when we have an unintentional killing that occurs during a dangerous felony, I always want you to think of this alternative charge of murder 2 under a theory of depraved heart murder. Indeed, you should always be mindful that any death could trigger a variety of theories of criminal homicide. So as a recap of what depraved heart murder is, the elements are, first, that an average person would know that the conduct endangers human life in general. That's what we call the objective test. Remember, it doesn't mean that a death is going to happen, only that it could happen. Second, we focus on the nature of the activity and ask whether it's a base antisocial act devoid of socially redeeming value, done with base antisocial motive. This makes this behavior pointedly different from what would ordinarily be gross negligence for involuntary manslaughter. In situations where the defendant is engaged in the commission of a felony, this element tends to be easy to prove. Finally, element number 3 in depraved heart murder demands that the defendant knew that conduct endangers human life just as much as an average person does. So, with this theory, looking at the facts of People versus James, you can understand why the prosecution charged with murder 2 under a theory of depraved heart. First, let's ask, do average people know that manufacturing meth in close quarters where people are living could endanger their lives? The answer is yes. Look at what I did. I took those facts of living in the trailer, people living there, close quarters. But there is more. What's interesting is how you know how this is true. It's not just about the trailer and the children underfoot and people living there. Here is where opinion drafting becomes so important. And as I often say, opinions are never accidentally written. Each word, each paragraph has value and is strategically placed. In this opinion, were you surprised to see Justice Rishley, who authored the opinion, describe in such great detail how meth is manufactured? I was. I didn't even know how meth was manufactured. Why do you think she did this? Her detailing the recipe for meth making is purposeful. It definitely served an analytical, legal purpose. The court here is making a very strong point that cooking meth includes chemicals that are highly combustible, along with a series of heat sources to cook the meth. In fact, look at how often these dangerous chemicals are combined with heat. As the court emphasizes later in the opinion, some of these chemicals are so easily combustible that their vapors could be ignited by any heat source nearby. Anyone with high school training would appreciate this is a potentially dangerous situation. Not only does the average person know it's dangerous to satisfy element number 1 under our theory of depraved heart, prosecution argued James herself knew it was dangerous. And of course, if she knew it was dangerous, that would satisfy the subjective test in element number 3. And here prosecution argued her subjective knowledge of the danger is evidenced by how she testified. She took great care to try to cook meth safely. She knew how dangerous it was. She kept the ingredients separated. She wrapped her coffee pot. Of course, yes, she did the act with her babies underfoot in the kitchen. So that's elements 1 and 3. Element number 2, base antisocial act and motive, seem to be easily met. James did commit a base antisocial act by committing the felony of manufacturing meth when her babies died. And although it was terribly tragic, it doesn't matter that she was so distraught when they died. Her base antisocial behavior comes from her manufacturing meth. What's James' response to this theory of murder 2? Remember, we're still sitting in depraved heart murder. James seems to be arguing on 2 different fronts. First, she's arguing that element number 1, the objective test, isn't really proven. She's saying average people don't really know that meth labs could blow up. She argues that we can't say cooking meth endangers human life because not a lot of meth labs actually do blow up. She's right, but the court rejects the argument. The court responds with the following statement: we do not understand the term high probability to mean greater than 50%. Very few activities in life, even non-criminal acts, carry such a risk. The statement I just quoted is going to be used by the court again when it discusses the felony murder rule, but it's applicable here. The court says the prosecution doesn't have to show that her trailer was likely to blow up every time she cooked meth, just that the potential to endanger human life was there. It's actually the same analysis we saw in Knoller when Marjorie Knoller's Pressicanarius killed Diane Whipple on the landing in her apartment building. It wasn't necessary to prove that it was probable that they were going to kill somebody that day when she walked them down from the roof, just that the potential was there. So that was one argument James had. It was rejected. Second, still staying with depraved heart, James argues that she didn't appreciate that she was endangering human life in general. She argued she cooked meth in the safest way possible. She did the steps slowly. She generally didn't have the children around when she was cooking, but of course that wasn't true on that day. The court says this isn't a plausible defense. In truth, it's the opposite. Doing something as safely as possible indicates that James understood the risk. James may have loved her children. She may have been devastated when they were dying, and I'm sure she was, but that doesn't mitigate the fact that she exhibited depraved heart when she engaged in such risky behavior in the trailer.